Mark Halpern.
So, Dan, I know you and I both love to relitigate the past, but let's not do that. Put yourself in the White House meeting today with the president and congressional leaders. They turn to you and say, Dan, what should we do now? What role, constructive role, can the United States play to try to deal with the situation in Iraq? What are the elements that you would recommend to them?
Well, first of all, if the president agrees that we have a strategic interest in heading off what is not just an Iraqi problem, it's an Iraq and Syria problem, right? The critical mistakes in 2011 were not just not doing anything about Syria, but also withdrawing fully from Iraq. So we now have this big ungovernable space along the Syrian-Iraqi border that will, have all the sort of attributes of Afghanistan pre-9/11, but a much more valuable real estate, much more strategically important part of the world. So even if you don't believe the human catastrophe is reason enough, the strategic interests are there. The reality is, Mark, through the history of the Iraq War, and it's disappointing, it's very frustrating for me to say this, because we always believed early on that as we stood up an Iraqi government, as there were Iraqi elections, as we stood up an Iraqi military, over time this government and military would be able to stand on its own. What we've learned over time is that's not the case, that there is this complex relationship in Iraq between security and politics. And if the government cannot provide basic security, the politics are a mess. And our presence in Iraq in some way, not combat forces necessarily, but in some way gives us influence. Because Maliki, if he doesn't have us to turn to, he has leverage. He has the Iranians. The Iranian government is more than happy to fill that void. We've been most successful. The situation in Iraq today is no more complex than when President Bush was dealing with a decision about the surge, right? You had Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was the precursor to ISIS. You had the Anbar awakening willing to take on Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Zarqawi's outfit. And then you had a security vacuum that was on the receiving end of those attacks that was being filled by Shiite militias. So there was total chaos. We didn't know what side we were on. Providing basic security and providing basic on-the-ground advice to the government of Iraq makes a difference. And so I would say some kind of special ops capabilities, some kind of air power, some kind of overall covert operations and intelligence capabilities.
And you actually have, of course, Democrats like Dianne Feinstein who are now coming out saying we have got to go in there and do something. Let's go to Sam.